Welcome back to Beyond the Badge, where we tell the stories that need to be told, the stories that stir the conscience and refuse to be forgotten. On a quiet Wednesday morning in Portland, Oregon, the sky was a pale, washed blue, the kind of sky that promises nothing dramatic, nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of sky that makes you believe, just for a moment, that the world is exactly as it should be. Dr. Gloria Washington believed that too as she stepped out her front door at 7:42 in the morning, a cup of chamomile tea warming her palm, her garden gloves folded over her forearm. The roses along her front walk were beginning to unfold, deep crimson petals, thick and heavy with morning dew. She had planted them 3 years ago, right after her mother passed. Tending them had become a kind of prayer. She did not know, as she uncoiled the garden hose, that the next 30 minutes would change not just her life, but the lives of thousands of Americans she had never met. She did not know that this ordinary Wednesday morning was about to become a moment that a nation would watch, debate, and finally reckon with. But the roses, they knew. Even before the first footstep echoed on the sidewalk, one perfect bloom trembled on its stem as if it could already feel what was coming. Dr. Gloria Washington was 61 years old, though she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had long since stopped measuring her worth by the opinions of others. She stood 5'7" with silver-streaked natural hair that she wore close and proud, and dark brown eyes that did not so much look at the world as examine it, gently but thoroughly, the way a careful judge reviews every word of a document before signing her name. Because that is exactly what she was, a judge. Not a municipal judge, not a county court judge, but a federal judge, appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, one of the most powerful courts in the country. She had spent 37 years in the law. She had argued before the Supreme Court. She had written opinions that shaped immigration policy, protected voting rights, and defined the limits of police power in a democracy. But on this morning, she was not Dr. Washington, circuit judge. She was simply Gloria, a woman in her garden, in worn jeans and a pale yellow blouse, doing what her mother had taught her to do: tend the things that are beautiful so they do not die. The Laurelhurst neighborhood was one of Portland's loveliest. Wide, tree-lined streets, gracious older homes with deep porches, neighbors who waved from their driveways. Gloria had lived here for 11 years. She knew the letter carrier by name. She knew which neighbor baked on Saturday mornings because the smell of cinnamon carried on the air. She was not a newcomer here. She was not a visitor. She was home. Gloria had grown up in a different kind of neighborhood, a row house in Baltimore, the youngest of 4 children born to a school teacher and a postal worker who believed, with a fierce and stubborn faith, that education was the one inheritance no one could take from you. She had graduated summa cum laude from Howard University, gone on to Yale Law School, and spent the first decade of her career as a public defender, choosing, deliberately, to stand between the powerless and the full force of the state. She understood from the inside what it meant to face a system that was not built with you in mind. She had sat across from clients, young men mostly, black and brown and poor, who had been stopped, searched, charged, and convicted not because of what they had done, but because of what they looked like. She had held their hands in courtrooms. She had looked into the eyes of their mothers. That experience had never left her, even as her career ascended. When the President of the United States called to offer her a seat on the Ninth Circuit, she had sat in her office for a long time before accepting, not because she doubted her qualifications, but because she understood the weight of what it meant to carry those memories into that courtroom, to be a judge who still remembered what it felt like to represent the voiceless. She carried that memory every day. It was part of why she tended her roses with such care. The world she had seen, in courtrooms, in depositions, in the private testimonies of those who had been wronged, that world needed moments of beauty to survive. It needed small, stubborn acts of love. She was on her second pass along the flower bed, adjusting the hose's pressure to a gentle arc, when she first heard the footsteps. Officer Brian Calloway was 44 years old, 15 years on the Portland Police Bureau, and he walked with the particular confidence of a man who had rarely, if ever, been made to question himself. He had dark, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and a jaw set like a man who has decided something, though what he had decided was not yet clear. He crossed the sidewalk toward Gloria's front yard without pausing, without hesitating, the way a man moves when he believes the space he is entering is his to enter. Hey you! What are you doing there?" Gloria straightened, turning slowly. She had learned, over 6 decades of life in America, to move slowly when a uniformed officer approached, to keep her hands visible, to breathe. "Good morning," she said, measured and calm. "I'm watering my garden." "This your house?" She looked at him for a moment. She recognized the question, not just the words, but what lived behind them, that specific suspension of possibility, that presumption. "Yes," she said, "this is my home. I live here." Calloway's eyes moved over her, over the garden gloves, the warm jeans, the hose in her hand, and she could see him constructing a story in real time, a story that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with what he expected to see when he looked at a black woman on this block at this hour doing this work. "You got ID? I need to see some identification." "May I ask on what basis?" "On the basis that I'm asking. You a maid or something? Because I've had reports of a break-in on this street." The air between them went very still. A maid. Or something. Gloria felt somewhere deep in her chest the familiar grief of it, the old, unending grief of being made a stranger in your own life. But she did not let it reach her face. She had sat in more hostile rooms than this. She had held herself together in courtrooms where men in expensive suits tried to unmake her with a look. She opened her mouth to respond, and in that moment, the garden hose shifted in her hands, a small, involuntary movement, and a brief arc of water caught the hem of Officer Calloway's uniform trouser. A drop. Barely a drop. What came next happened so fast that the neighbors who later described it would struggle to find the right words. Calloway's face changed, a sudden, ugly darkening, and he stepped forward and grabbed the hose from her hands. And then he turned it on her, at full pressure, from 2 feet away, direct and sustained while she staggered backward and fell to the wet ground, gasping, unable to breathe, her hands raised in front of her face as the force of the water knocked the air from her lungs. For 53 seconds, an eternity, he held it there. Pause. Breathe. Let that settle. Across the street, a woman named Barbara Jenkins had been walking her dog and had stopped, frozen with horror. 3 doors down, a retired teacher named Raymond Foster had been reading the paper on his porch and was already on his feet, phone raised, recording. A college student in an upstairs window had been live streaming before Calloway even noticed anyone was watching. By the time Calloway finally released the hose and stepped back, soaked and trembling and furious on the ground before him, was a 61-year-old woman who had done nothing except water her roses in her own yard on a quiet Wednesday morning. Gloria lay on the wet grass for a moment, the world spinning, her lungs working to remember how to breathe. The soil beneath her palms was cold and dark. One of her roses, a crimson bloom she had tended all spring, lay crushed beside her hand, its petals scattered across the mud. In that moment, she did not think about the law. She did not think about her title or her courtroom or the federal seal on her chamber's door. She thought about her mother, who had pressed seeds into the same kind of earth. She thought about every client she had ever represented, every young man who had looked at her from across a courtroom table with eyes that asked, without words, "Will anyone see me? Will anyone believe me?" She thought, "I understand now, in my body, what I only understood before." in my mind. And then she got up, slowly, with great dignity, with the deliberate composure of a woman who has spent a lifetime choosing, in the hardest moments, not what is easy, but what is right. She was soaked through. Her yellow blouse clung to her shoulders. Her garden gloves were ruined. Her hair was flat against her head, and the roses her mother had inspired were broken and bent in the mud behind her. She reached into the pocket of her wet jeans, and she withdrew a small leather case. She opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it out to him with a steady hand. Inside the case, embossed in gold, bearing the seal of the United States of America, was her judicial identification, her name, her title, her court. The gold caught the morning sun and glinted, bright as a verdict. For a long moment, Officer Brian Calloway stared at it. The color drained from his face so completely that Barbara Jenkins, watching from across the street, later said it was like watching a man realize he had stepped off a cliff. That terrible suspended instant before the fall begins. "I am Dr. Gloria Washington," she said, her voice clear and even and absolutely without tremor. "I am a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. You have just assaulted a federal officer in the execution of her daily life. Everything that happened in the last 4 minutes has been recorded from at least 3 angles and is currently being broadcast live to several thousand people." She paused. And then, with a quiet that was somehow louder than anything else that had been said that morning, "I suggest you do not say anything else." Calloway's mouth opened, closed. His hand went to his radio. He seemed, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, to have absolutely no idea what to do. And the world watched. Within the hour, the video had been shared 200,000 times. By noon, it was 1 million. By evening, it was everywhere. On every news network, in every corner of social media, in living rooms and church halls and barber shops across the country. Police Chief Sandra Morrison arrived at the scene personally. Calloway was escorted to his vehicle. His badge was collected before he reached the patrol car. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a Civil Rights Division inquiry before the afternoon was out. What the investigation revealed, over the weeks that followed, was not the story of one bad morning or one bad officer. It was the story of a pattern, deep, documented, and long ignored. 12 prior excessive force complaints, 37 documented stops of minority residents without cause, $1.2 million in prior settlements paid quietly by the city, body camera footage showing systematic deactivations during minority encounters, and a series of private messages that Calloway had apparently believed would remain private, in which he had written about a Black family who had recently moved into the Laurelhurst neighborhood. "Let's see what doesn't belong." That message became, at trial, the nail in the coffin. The courtroom was silent when the prosecutor read it aloud. Juror number 7, a retired school teacher from Beaverton, closed her eyes. Juror number 3, a grandfather of 4, placed his hands flat on the railing and breathed slowly through his nose. The gallery did not move. Officer Carter, Calloway's own former partner, took the stand and testified, quietly and at evident personal cost, about the profiling he had witnessed over years, about the times he had said nothing, about the weight of that silence, which he was only now finally setting down. The neighbors, Barbara Jenkins, Raymond Foster, the college student whose live stream had been seen by millions, testified about what they had seen, about the woman on the ground, about what it had felt like to witness it and not be able to stop it, and how they had understood, in that moment, that the only weapon they had was their phones, and that they had used them. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on every count: assault, official misconduct, coercion, hate crime enhancement, and federal civil rights violations under Title 18, Section 242. Captain Harris, who had suppressed prior complaints against Calloway for years, was separately charged and convicted on federal obstruction counts. At sentencing, Judge Margaret Collins looked at Brian Calloway for a long moment before she spoke. This sentence is not only for Dr. Washington, it is for all of them. Calloway received 13 years, a lifetime ban from law enforcement, a $250,000 fine. The courtroom exhaled. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened, not just in Portland, but across the state and in ripples across the country. Oregon passed mandatory always-on body camera legislation, the most comprehensive in the nation. A civilian oversight board was established with real subpoena power, able to compel testimony and access records that had previously been shielded behind departmental walls. An early warning system was implemented to flag and review officers with patterns of complaints before those patterns became tragedies. The state legislature named the package of reforms the Washington Act. Gloria stood at the podium when the governor signed it into law, and she said very little. She had always believed that the law, at its best, spoke for itself, but she allowed herself one moment, one brief, unguarded moment, to look out at the crowd gathered on the Capitol steps and to feel, fully, what it meant to have turned something terrible into something that would protect others. She thought of her mother. She always did in moments like this. She also established the Washington Initiative, a nonprofit providing legal defense funding, citizen journalism training, and scholarships for young people who wanted to study law and public service. Its motto was painted on the office wall in Northeast Portland: "Dignity does not negotiate." Back on her street in Laurelhurst, the roses came back. They always do. That is the thing about roses, and about certain kinds of people. You can knock them down, uproot them, crush them in the mud on a Wednesday morning. But if the roots are deep enough, and if someone tends them with enough love, they bloom again, every spring, without fail. Barbara Jenkins brought a new rosebush as a gift. Raymond Foster built a small wooden trellis for it. The college student who had live-streamed that morning now worked as a researcher for the Washington Initiative. On a quiet Saturday in October, Gloria was in her garden again when a young woman in a law school sweatshirt stopped at her gate. "Are you Dr. Washington?" "I am," said Gloria. "I got a Washington Initiative scholarship. I just wanted to say thank you, in person." Gloria smiled, not her public smile, but the real one. "What do you want to do with your law degree?" "I want to help people like me," the young woman said, simply. Gloria took her hand. "Then you are exactly what this country needs." There is a question that lives at the center of this story, and it is not a comfortable one. If Dr. Gloria Washington, a 61-year-old federal judge, appointed by the President of the United States, a woman with a gold seal in her pocket and 37 years of the law behind her, if she could be knocked to the ground in her own front yard on a quiet Wednesday morning simply because of how she looked to a man who had decided, before a single word was spoken, that she did not belong, then what of those who do not have a gold seal? What of the young woman in Baltimore who has no credentials to produce? What of the grandfather in Memphis who was never told his rights? What of every ordinary American who has stood, soaked, and trembling before the full force of a system that was not looking at them, only at what it had already decided to see? Dr. Washington said it plainly 3 weeks after the sentencing. "I did not want sympathy for myself. I wanted accountability, not as vengeance, but as medicine, because a society that allows its power to be used this way is a society that is quietly making itself sick. And accountability is not punishment. Accountability is the beginning of healing." The roses bloomed that spring with unusual abundance. She brought 24 of them to the room where the Washington Act was signed. She set them on the table without ceremony. She believed in beauty as an act of resistance. She believed that the deepest form of courage was not the dramatic gesture, but the daily, quiet, stubborn decision to tend what is beautiful and refuse to let it die, even when the world raises a hose and tries to wash it away. Even then. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember someone you love, then you already understand why we are here. Subscribe to Beyond the Badge. Every story we tell is one that matters. Hit the bell so the next story always finds you. Like this video if you believe in accountability and justice. Tell us in the comments, who carried quiet dignity through an unjust moment? Share the story with someone who needs to hear it today. We will be right here, Beyond the Badge, waiting for you.